This is Andrew Paul Cronin, and you're listening to the Q&A with A.P.C, the show that features conversations with artists, cultural figures, policymakers, performers, and other innovators living in Virginia. Episode 1, Matt Eich. Matt Eich is a photographer born and raised in Virginia. He has a degree in photojournalism from Ohio University and is currently pursuing a master's degree in photography from Hartford Art School's International Limited Residency Program. He has shot for such clients as Apple Computers, GQ, Time Magazine, The New Yorker, and Al Jazeera. Matt Eich currently lives in Norfolk, Virginia with his wife and 2 young daughters. One of the things, we're recording by the way already, one of the things that I noticed, I was going back through your old emails, and you really think about your subject lines in your emails, like your blast list.
Yeah, you have to be a little thoughtful if people are going to look.
Is that true?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Why, are there people who aren't thoughtful? And I have that helmet, by the way. So you do think about that, obviously, right? Does that drive you crazy that you have to think about your subject line? I mean, or do you enjoy having to, like, I don't know. I guess some people would say, like, that's overthinking it. Because it could be, like, email 74 subject line. But that doesn't appeal.
Right. Yeah, it's hard for that to cut through the haze. So in general, as a visual communicator, you have to think about your audience. And with these email blasts, I'm trying to reach people that are very busy that could potentially hire me, but chances are they're never going to see the email because it's going to go straight to their spam folder, or, it's just going to get buried in the hundreds of emails they receive that day. So anything I can do to help kind of like, I don't know, make it a little more apparent and memorable, then hopefully they'll click.
So you see, because most of it's kind of seasonal in a way. I think I have some reference to the season.
Because I only send them a few times a year.
Right.
Because I don't want to inundate people at the same time.
Does it bother you if people unsubscribe?
It's just part of doing business, really. Like, sometimes I'll accidentally have 2 people, like 2 email addresses for the same person, and they just want to have one.
Yeah.
I can relate to that.
Right.
I get too many emails. So.
Right. I just feel like that would crush me. Like everyone would crush me.
Yeah. In the greater scheme of things, an unsubscribe from your email list where there's 2,000 or so people on the list is much less painful than, let's say, finding out that you were a finalist for 5 grants within the course of a year and not receiving any of them. That's more of an ego crush.
That's a thing?
Oh, that's a very recent thing for me, yeah.
I'm sorry about that. We'll talk about that.
That's all right. That was last year. This is a new year.
Where'd you grow up?
I was born in Richmond, Virginia, and raised in Suffolk, so not far from where I live now. And Norfolk's kind of the big city compared to Suffolk. So,
how old were you moved to Suffolk from Richmond? Because that's sort of a...
I was 4 years old when we moved
you
from...
Don't know. You didn't know?
No.
What was that, a parent job thing?
I think so, yeah. Well, my dad was in med school up in Richmond, and then I think he, got a job down here out in Suffolk mostly, and then he was commuting between Suffolk and Norfolk.
He's a doctor?
Mm-hmm. Cardiologist.
Is that heart?
Mm-hmm.
It's your heart. Does he do surgery and stuff?
Nope, he does catheterizations and things like that. So he'll run like a wire with a cath or a stent up into somebody's veins, usually through their legs, and open up their arteries if they're becoming clogged.
So his job has a visual component too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he's like watching this procedure on a screen as it's happening, usually in black and white, and he's kind of like pulsing, like it's almost like a film noir kind of like look to it. It's super grainy. It's almost beautiful.
Have you ever shot him?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Doing his job?
Yeah, I've got a picture in here of that.
What'd your mom do? And what did she do?
She was a physical therapist, but she stopped working after 2 or 3 of us were around. I guess I'm the oldest of 4, and she homeschooled us.
Does she still help with little body aches and pains and strategies for stretching out the limbs and things like that as a physical therapist, or is that? I think that job is sort of always something that is somewhat useful in daily life. Gardening, you pull your back, you know what to do.
Yeah, she actually suffers from a lot of her own physical aches and pains, so I suppose it factors into her ability to deal with that. But yeah, and she went back to work a little bit recently, but then just found like it was too much because she's also juggling some health issues.
Mm-hmm. Where was high school?
High school was a strange hybrid of homeschool and private Christian school, sort of. I had classes a couple days a week at a place called Oak Tree, which was an umbrella school, and then I did like AP classes at Tidewater.
What's an umbrella school?
So an umbrella school would be like I would go there a few days a week to take classes that my mom didn't feel like she was prepared to teach me, and other classes I would take at home or like do on my own or have kind of an outside tutor, but like mostly math and science. I would go to this umbrella school, and then I would do TCC for AP classes, and all of those credits kind of combined to help me get out of high school a year early.
When did were you public school at all or private? Was it all homeschool?
It was mostly homeschooled for like 8+ years, and then I did a couple years of private Christian school, which didn't really set super well with me. Like the rigor of the environment wasn't really well suited for me. Homeschool was pretty well suited because I could structure my time and do the work that I needed to do, and then go out and
whatever.
Yeah, like bullshit or make pictures, actually, because I was making photographs pretty early on. I still remember some of the like early textbooks where I would be getting distracted, ADHD as ever, and like drawing little cameras in the margins of the notebooks and stuff.
Homeschool always seems like it just is something that I went to public school, and I guess I've always been curious about it. I'm a teacher, so homeschool it's always been interesting because I don't, it seems like something that wouldn't really be kind of legal in a way,
Right.
Which sounds, I don't know how that sounds, but I mean, obviously it is. But did you go to any public? Nothing.
Mm-mm. Now, growing up in Suffolk, my folks didn't feel like the options were there. It was Nansemond River High School, and they would have reports of guns and knives and all that,
right.
paranoia invoking stuff for parents. But the
were
truth
they
is,
homeschooled?
no. Like I think they both went to public school growing up.
You think that played into it?
Maybe, but it was a different generation when they grew up than when I grew up in different places. Obviously, like my dad grew up in Portsmouth, my mom in North Carolina. Yeah.
Do you ever think about homeschooling the girls?
No. I mean, I don't think that I'm cut out for that, and I don't think Melissa is either. I think she would just like lose her mind not going to work.
Right.
And I'm kind of the same way.
Get out.
Yeah. Both of us do.
You could co-teach. So when you said you would be sketching in your notebook, camera images, and getting distracted, and then you would go out and do your thing. Was it photography, but other stuff as well? Like, what would you do?
Growing up, it was a lot of like sports early on. Played baseball and like neighborhood hockey, street hockey, and whatever we could get ourselves into. And then
like street hockey.
Mm-hmm.
Street hockey.
Yeah. And then more music, I guess. So photography kind of took hold between 10 and 14, and then music from 14 to 18, where photography took a backseat, but it was still there. And then
you were in a band.
Yeah, I played in a few bands. There was one band called Sincerely Yours. And
emo? Was it emo?
No, actually, so we started just as like metal, right, and kind of verged into sort of spaz jazz influenced metal. And then we had another band called Morse Code for Homicide, which was definitely like jazz influenced metal.
That's an awesome name.
Yeah, a lot of those guys still live around here. Some of them still make music, which I think is awesome. But yeah, I don't think I was cut out for it. Like,
what did you do? What was your role?
Screamed in the first band, played some guitar, and then drummed in Morse Code.
Screamed in the first band, drummed. You still drum?
Got rid of the drum set a long time ago, sadly. I drum on the steering wheel when I'm driving, all the time. The
kids, they're at school, there's kids who, because I played drums in marching band in high school, and a lot of my students drum on the desk just out of nervous habit. And it doesn't bother me as much as other teachers because I used to do it too, but I always try to steer them. I kind of pull them aside and be like, listen, you're a drummer. You should really kind of try to get into that drumming program. I don't know if anyone actually has, but yeah, that's going to get picked up.
Yeah, it's going to be a good background noise.
That's the dog snoring, by the way, Stella. So bands. Did you play out? Did you play gigs?
We did, mostly locally. We went on one minor tour to North Carolina and maybe one other place.
Outer Banks, North Carolina, or inland?
Inland. I don't even remember where, but we opened up for a band we really loved called Evelyn. Yeah. And opened for a couple other bands that we liked. Cool Hand Luke, I think, was actually our first show, and that was, a pathetic kind of experience. But we didn't care. We had fun. We were making something. Like, the joy of creating something with somebody else was still something that I really find valuable.
You're a creator. True and true. Your dad, your grandfather gave you the first camera.
Mm-hmm.
What was that? What was the camera?
It's a little point and shoot. We were on a road trip, and it was probably some like Nikon Pentax, some sort of, really cheap sort of thing. And yeah, made a picture with it that somehow galvanized this desire to render the world in pictures.
Was it a picture that you felt like, was there a picture that you felt like you captured something and it sort of blew your hair back? Or was it something that you showed someone and they had a reaction to it that was like, oh shit, I guess there's something to it? I mean, was it reactions, your own reaction, or other people's reaction to it? Because people shoot pictures and I don't know, I guess you have to have someone who sort of gives you some positive feedback. I mean, it helps, right? I mean,
right.
You don't have to have that, but it helps to have someone.
I don't remember the early feedback, but I remember seeing this one photograph and being like, oh, that's what it was like to be there. Somehow it encapsulated that feeling.
Something you shot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it was a picture of a fence post in Cades Cove, Tennessee, made on that road trip with my grandfather. And that's kind of what triggered it. And after that, the next picture that I remember making was some like blurry night light photograph from the car as we were driving somewhere. And I was just like, oh, cool. Like, the light on the film does this thing that my eye doesn't do. That's kind of interesting.
What color was the fence?
It was just a worn out, beat up, old wooden fence.
Can you describe the picture?
Yeah, it was in Cades Cove, Tennessee, so there's a kind of mountain range in the background, and in the foreground is this weathered fence post that's pretty much disconnected from everything around it at this point, because I think the fence has collapsed, and it's grass growing up around it and probably some mold on it, and yeah, it's still standing, and it somehow encapsulated that feeling.
Was it like close up? Was it a long shot, like the whole length of the fence?
Just one pole kind of coming out of the ground, and then like some mountains in the background, and maybe like a piece of wood coming off to the side of it or something.
If people wanted to see that picture now, where could they find it?
On the wall of my grandfather's bedroom.
You don't have it on your website?
Nope. I don't even know if the negative exists anymore, but that's the only print that I know of.
One of the things I was gonna ask you about, so I will, is I've been to your studio. You call it your studio?
Mm-hmm.
I've been to your studio, and you're real organized with like digitally organized in terms of, at least for the little that I saw, that they're folders and they're labeled and you have it all very organized. Would you say you're organized? You have to be organized. Like, as a teacher, I feel like one of the things that I would tell any new teacher is that it's going to test your organizational skills to the max, because things just keep coming and coming and coming and coming and coming, and I'm always trying to clear my desk and to save what I've done, because it just keeps coming and coming and coming. And but would you say you're organized? And how do you organize it?
There's no easy answer. My physical working space tends to kind of reflect my inner working space, and as I get more stressed and kind of stretched thin, my space will get more and more cluttered, and shit will just start to pile up on my desk.
Like your physical space, like your desk gets...
Yeah, and the computer's the same way, but to survive and manage the number of files that I produce or have to deal with on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, yeah, I have to be very organized with that, and I'm kind of OCD about how I organize mostly the digital files. I had this kind of working method for the film, but I've shot so much film in the last year that it sort of fell apart. At a certain point, I just couldn't keep up with it. And I've got negatives scattered between 2 or 3 different labs around the country right now. So I have to bring it all back together and figure out how I'm going to archive that. But yeah, I'm trying to keep things in some semblance of order so that, you know, if I die in a car accident someday, people aren't going to be like, I wonder how we find his pictures.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
the digital will.
Right.
Is a thing. You know about the digital will?
I don't think I've heard of it.
So if you die, when we die, since we have all these passwords and usernames for all your shit, you know, when dad dies and he's got, you know, his Cox communication and all of this stuff, it's just, you don't want to just to be out there like just sitting out there. So you create a digital will where all your usernames and passwords are available to your whomever you leave it to, so they can go in and delete or take or, you know, archive or whatever those things. So there goes your weekend, huh?
Yeah, I guess so. That's going to take longer than a weekend, my friend.
Do you ever miss an opportunity to take a picture? Has there been, I mean, are there times, because you always have, like, you have it's right sitting right there, and I do want to talk to you about your, like, run down the gear that you have, because I'm sure people care about that. I care about that, but people probably care more than I do about it. But have you ever missed an opportunity to take a picture?
All the time.
Every day?
Probably, yeah. I mean, it's a matter of seeing and looking. If I'm not looking, then I'm not going to see.
But aren't you always looking? I mean, that was one of the things.
Yeah.
I mean, because are there pictures now that you missed in the past? We've been talking for a half hour. Have you missed a picture?
Oh, I'm sure. Especially if I were to step outdoors and expand my horizons, but within, you know, the space I could be making pictures.
Have to turn it down when you're doing something like this, or if you are having to listen to a lecture, do you have to like kind of tune it down?
Yeah, because otherwise, like, the desire to photograph, like, especially in the right light, or if I see the right person, or it could just be the texture of a wall sometimes that is just captivating to me. And once that sense is engaged, then it's hard to disengage without making some at least visual note of it, whether it's with, you know, like a DSLR or a film camera or my phone. And those all take different levels of kind of engagement. Like, the phone is the easiest, just to, like, I can pull it out and I can make a picture and I can put it back in my pocket. But, like, you know, with the digital camera, I may have to dial in exposure. And with the film camera, I'm like, okay, I got to focus, I got to expose. This is costing me money. Don't fuck it up.
Do you remember the last thing specifically that you felt like you missed?
I try not to ruminate on them too long anymore, because there are so many. And I'm sure if I, like, really sat and thought, I could pull up, like, a humdinger that I missed. But I've tried to bury it so that I don't think about it after it's gone, because the way I'm looking at things typically is like, you know, we are part of this kind of time-space continuum, and we're just moving along in this little, like, river of information or whatever that's flowing at us, and you can grab things here and there as they pass, but once it's passed, then there's no use dredging it back up again. And I'm always trying to, like, look ahead and see what's coming my direction next. And this happens in a very literal way when I'm driving and I have a camera on my lap and I'm, like, looking for what's coming down the road towards me that might be a photograph or it might not be. And I'll try and make a good one. But 99.9% of the time, because my focus is on driving, the picture is going to be secondary. It's going to be shit. But occasionally there's something kind of magical.
I saw the WHRO profile, the scene set, and I've seen a couple, I think, in there, and otherwise, you're driving and you're sticking your arm out the window. So you still do it. You still capture it. You drove across the country not too long ago. Mm-hmm. What, did you take the northern or the southern route?
I flew to LA and met a friend there, and we drove up to Seattle and then across. So kind of a diagonal.
Who'd you go with?
A buddy of mine named Ian Bates.
What's his deal?
He's a photographer as well, based in Seattle. He started kind of his interest in photography when he was in high school, and he started emailing me then too. And then he went to Ohio University, majored in photojournalism as well.
Buddy from school.
Yeah, and then he came and interned for me a few years ago and lived here in Norfolk and made work here before he went back to finish school.
Did you find anything on the road that could be a project one day? Or are you focusing on driving? You're trying to tune it down when you're driving. You try to get there safe. I don't need any more projects. Or are you sort of open to it? I mean, because that could be right. I mean, that's it would be easy, or it wouldn't be easy, but I mean, just documenting. You have a folder on your, speak going back to your organization? Do you have a folder on your computer, the trip across the country, with all of the pics uploaded?
I have a folder on my computer called America. That's like a mix of that trip and many other trips before it, and all the assignments that took me out of the context of these other projects that I've got, which are like Carry Me Ohio in southeastern Ohio,
Sin and Salvation
in Baptisttown, which is in Mississippi, the Seven Cities, which is here. And so I've been calling this other America work We the Free. Do you feel like maybe you should make it smaller? Yeah, it's way more manageable when you focus on something small and specific. But the way that I tend to stumble into things is I start very small and then it just kind of ripples out, and I can't control where it goes, but I just have to go with it. And
what do you mean you can't control where it goes? I mean, I know that's like, but maybe you should control it.
Maybe, yeah. And I think there are a lot of shifts that are occurring now in the way that I'm thinking and working. But at least in the way that I have been working, it has to be serendipitous for it to be worthwhile.
So just having that cross country, driving across the country, you drove across the country, and just having that as a thing that you could package in whichever way, be it digital or book form or on a zine, or couldn't you just blast that out to the contacts and have that try to find its place in the world? But you don't, right? Couldn't you do that?
Could, but the way that it realistically works is like, even though so I was shooting digital and I was shooting medium format film and I was shooting panoramic film, and so I'm kind of like producing these things in different ways, and then I'm receiving them back at a different time period. So like the film comes back to me way later than the digital stuff, and I don't understand what it is that I'm making when I'm out there making it. Usually I'm just like trying to experience things. And so, when I'm traveling with somebody like Ian, it's totally in flux, and we're like, let's see how far we want to drive today, and like maybe we'll stop somewhere because we see something just magical, and we'll spend hours there. Or maybe it'll just be like, we jump out of the car a few times, grab some pictures, and we keep on trucking. And coming back across the country, I had an assignment in West Virginia. We knew we would stop there, but other than that, we kind of like made things up as we went along. And then when we stopped in West Virginia, Ian's got this fascination with old cars, and he's got this kind of particular obsession with old car jousting, which is a hashtag on Instagram.
Like muscle car or like
just
1950
old cool cars. Okay. Yeah. So like just look up the hashtag old car jousting, and Ian's on a lot of that. But we pulled into Charleston, West Virginia, and there was an old car convention that was going on there that weekend. So Ian was like in hog heaven for days. Yeah.
I gotta ask, what the hell is old car jousting? What does that look like?
It's an iPhone trend, best described by just examining what it is. But it's like people making pictures of cool looking old cars, whether they're in good shape or otherwise.
Oh, I thought it was people in cars with their arms out the window with swords.
No, that would be way more interesting.
Well, we should get on that.
Yeah. So new sport, old car jousting.
When you're
arms off.
So you keep saying I can't. It does its thing. It does its own thing. I don't set out with driving across the country in my mind, and I'm gonna go there and I'm gonna shoot this and it's gonna be done. Do people in your graduate program tell you that's not the way you should do it? I mean, what are the conversations like about that? I mean, is this your thing, or is this everyone's kind of modus operandi? Because it doesn't seem like, it seems like that would be, it just seems like nothing ever ends.
Right.
But shouldn't things end? Did they tell you things should end, Matt? Shouldn't things end? They have to end.
Yeah, everything ends eventually, right?
No, no, apparently they don't.
Yeah, no, my projects don't seem to end. Like, so Ohio, technically I'm done. I haven't shot there since 2012, but I'm still like dying to go back and photograph
so it's
and
not
continue.
ending.
Right.
Right.
And that's my own problem and hang up, because I'm a perfectionist and the work's never good enough, and my ideas about photography and communication, it's evolving over a period of time. And when I'm involved in something really heavily, like Baptist Town, which I have been for the last 5 years, I've spent over 100 days there.
Greenwood, Mississippi.
Yeah, and I can't see it clearly anymore. So I feel like at this point I have to step away and, ruminate for a little while, and then go back in with a clearer idea of exactly what I should be doing, so that I don't spend 5 more years just wandering around this little town in the Mississippi Delta with no real goal in sight. So when I'm doing these sort of road trips, I try and put very few parameters, because I do want to make room for serendipity. But when I'm doing an assignment for somebody, it's very strict rules, very quick turnaround. It's like a hit list almost that you have to walk in and execute. And that's something that I functioned well at, as I was trained to do in this photojournalism school, but it's not the most creatively fulfilling or artistically rewarding way of making work.
One of the things I tell my students is that because they're just getting killed with these SOLs, and so we are always trying to show them and model the rigor and the endurance that it takes to sit for 3 hours to read really boring poems and nonfiction passages about lipizzan or horses and having to answer questions. And one of the things I always tell them is that you have to be able to know when you can't focus, and to get up and to advocate for yourself, and to take a break and to come back. And that's a test taking strategy. And your teacher has to or should let you go, even if you don't need to take a piss or you're not thirsty. You have to be able to come back and look at it again with fresh eyes. But one of the things that writers, in particular, authors and filmmakers, one of the things about art is that it's never done. Painters, it's never done. And that's one of the things that is probably the most maddening, I think, for artists, is that things are never done. Like, I don't know how at some point the novel has to be done, because there's a deadline, and you could always rewrite that sentence, or you could, change the arc of that character, but you have to get done. Mm-hmm. And I'm not telling you, listen, I'm not telling you how to do your thing, man. But I mean, it seems like it would be for me. It seems like for me it would be something that I would need closure on something. But this looks like this is done. This is done. The invisible yoke. Yeah, did I pronounce that right?
You did. We'll talk about that. So laying on the table in between us is a book maquette called The Invisible Yoke, which I made 12 copies of. And I made this edit in 2013, and the book was printed in 2014. And I am so ready to destroy the whole thing and start again from the ground up. And this is something that hardly anybody's seen. And I spent about 10 years making the photographs and about $3,500 making those 12 books.
Are the 12 books accounted for? Are they for sale? Can people buy them somewhere?
Mm-hmm. They're for sale for a really unreasonable price because they were so expensive to make. And there's a few of them that are going to be sent to publishers that I'd like to work with. And I highly doubt that any of them would publish the book as is, and I wouldn't want it to be published as is, to be honest. I've got like 2 years of new work that I've made that I want to add. I still want to photograph the RNC and the DNC next year. Like, there is a method to the madness.
Where overall. Are they going to be? Where's the conventions at?
The one that I know of is in Cleveland.
Is that RNC?
I believe so.
Yeah. Where can people buy it?
You can go to my website, and there's a shop or store button, and it's got that under there, and that's also where I'll sell my zines and various other things through.
Can you tell people your website?
That's matteichphoto.com. www.matteichphoto.com. EICHPHOTO.com.
When you go to approach people, do you snap it and then approach? Is it always different? You take a picture and then you ask permission, or sometimes you don't ask permission. Sometimes people don't grant permission. What's that like?
Every situation's different. Like, ideally, I have a chance to get to know somebody and I'm there, like, with their consent before any sort of interesting photograph happens. A lot of times when I'm moving quickly through a place, you'll see something unfolding and you just have to react and make the picture. And if somebody's unhappy about it, then you have to be really honest and tell them who you are and what you're there for, and not be offended that they were offended. You know what I mean? Because you don't know where they're coming from. And so I try and meet everybody where they're at and be respectful. If somebody doesn't want to be photographed, that is totally okay with me. There are a lot of other fish in the sea, but I always try and be attuned to the surroundings. My goal is not to get shot going out and making work, and I've certainly had plenty of opportunities for that. And people are surprisingly distrustful of cameras.
When you were in speaking in early March, mid-March, at the University of Southern Mississippi, who were you speaking to and about what?
I was speaking to a photojournalism class there, which is surprising to me that they have a photojournalism program, but that's kind of interesting and reassuring on some levels. And so I think there was some art photo students or people that were more from that background, but it was a lot of folks from the journalism department and that program specifically.
Do you write it out ahead of time? I mean, how do you just kind of go in there and talk?
Yep. And
how does that feel?
Really nerve-wracking before I start, and then once I start, it kind of just
going.
Flows. Yeah.
And you do a Q&A.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'll typically just, like, I've got a folder of work or something, and I'll drive through that and talk a little bit about the experience making the work and some of the things that I struggle with still about the work, because I've got problems with all of the pictures that I make, pretty much. Like, none of them are fully resolved. And then maybe I'll show a video or whatever, and then I try and make it a conversation as loose as possible. So we'll kind of chat about questions or concerns that they've got.
They find you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in that case, it's usually the school reaches out.
What's in your gear bag?
So it depends on the shoot, because I try and think about myself as a content gatherer. So it doesn't really matter what I'm paid to gather as long as I'm out in the field making something. So some days I'm gathering sound or video, but my wheelhouse is definitely stills, and that's where my heart is. So people typically would hire me to do that work. And I've got a Canon 5D Mark III with a few lenses that I can switch between for most any assignment, whether still or video. And then I've got a little Sony RX1 that comes with me pretty much everywhere I go. And that's honestly my main digital shooting camera at this point, just because it's very small and easy to use. And then I've got a handful of film cameras, like a Contax T2 if I'm really like on the fly doing kind of point and shoot stuff. Got a Hasselblad X-Pan, which I love. Makes very kind of weird panoramic frames that are hard to compose, but it's a good visual challenge. And then more and more recently, I've been using a Mamiya 7, which is a medium format camera. It's a 6/7 shape, so it's slightly different than 35 and actually feels a little better to the eye for me. But it requires me to slow down and think a lot because it's manual focus, manual exposure, and I just don't want to mess it up because it's pretty costly to make those pictures.
And you use, laptop and desktop, Macs?
Yeah, all Macs and the digital side of things. And then I use Photo Mechanic as my photo editing software. And when I say photo editing, I don't mean like manipulating the photographs. I mean actually selecting the photographs. So like on an average day, let's say I'll go out on an assignment and shoot maybe 500 frames. All of those frames would be named and dated in a very specific way to fit with my organization system. And then I would go through in Photo Mechanic and tag them, just to mark them or say like this picture is better than the other pictures. And then from there I come up with the edit. And then I would take those edited photographs, put them through Photoshop, not to add or take anything out. I don't manipulate my photographs in that way. No. But
capital ever.
Yeah, capital ever. Like that's just part of the photojournalism kind of trade rules and tradecraft is we don't take anything out or add anything to. I will dust spot a negative if a scan comes in with a dust spot that shouldn't be there that wasn't actually in the photograph. But other than
dust
that,
spot?
so like if you shoot a negative and you scan it, chances are there's going to be a piece of dust on that negative, and you can spot it out in Photoshop. In the old world, they would make a print and then, you know, spot it with like an ink set.
It's like erasing.
Yeah, erasing something that doesn't actually exist in the photograph.
Do you have to fill it back in with color if it's on a no?
No, I mean on Photoshop, it's smart.
Okay, it's intuitive.
Yeah.
Everyone has cameras now.
Mm-hmm.
Is that good or bad?
I'm gonna say that it's good. It certainly has some downsides because it floods the market and means that overall the commodity of photography is less valuable because people believe that things are available to them for free or for cheap because everybody's a photographer. But the truth is what they're buying is shit because the people don't know what they're making or how to disseminate that. There's exceptions to the rule, but I think that the real power of this technological shift and the exciting part of it is when different communities can kind of take ownership of their representation. So one of the like core problems with photography always has been that it's a typically white male preoccupation. You know, like very few African American women are photographers, and those that are like make really important work because nobody else does it, you know? So in like a place like Baptist Town, I think it's very interesting to see how like the young men and women there begin photographing themselves with these phones and disseminating that information about themselves in like a social media realm. But their awareness of self-image is much greater now than it was 10 years ago by a long shot. And it's just kind of like going to multiply in the years to come so that people become very concerned with and consumed with self-image, probably to the detriment of people trying to make photographs. But at this moment, at least, people are very interested in being photographed, I think, by and large, unless they've had a negative experience or they don't want to be seen for whatever reason.
It makes people more comfortable being photographed because people kind of feel like their self is out there to begin with.
Yeah, you know, it's not uncommon for me to photograph somebody and they'll be like, yo, man, put me up on Facebook. Mm-hmm. All right, cool. Okay, whatever. We'll find one another there, I guess. Yeah, but the idea of being able to take the power of representation out of the hands of like contemporary media and give that power to an individual or a community that's typically not able to take control of how they're seen or how they represent themselves in this kind of like mainstream spotlight, that's where the exciting stuff happens. And there are certainly young people that are like figuring out if they create this, I mean, like the platforms there, like let's say Instagram, mm-hmm. if they create a voice or like they have something to say, they can build an audience. They don't need any of that infrastructure. You don't need any training really either. Like you can just use that tool and say something important and people will listen, you know, and that's something that's totally new.
You ready for Germany?
Not really. I don't feel ready for Germany at all.
Is that passport ready?
Yeah, I don't think it's expired yet. I should double check that. No, I think it expires next year actually.
So April 24th, May 10th.
Yeah.
Komnik Gallery.
Mm-hmm.
How do you pronounce it?
Komnik,
yeah. How's your German? Sprechen Sie Deutsch, ja?
Nein.
Well, that's good. So Berlin, Germany.
Yeah. That's the next stop, and I'll be leaving sometime next week.
The whole program's going?
Yeah.
Everybody.
Mm-hmm. And the second year students are there now. I'm part of the first year class at the Hartford Art School, which is an international residency program. And that means that we have a home base in Hartford, Connecticut, but we are all kind of on our own space and on our own time, except for these selective, intensive kind of workshop experiences. So we're going to Berlin for about 2 weeks where we'll do an exhibition of new work, which we have to mount and kind of promote and do all of these different things for. And then we've got individual, you know, like the group crits where it's our class and we put the work on the wall and our advisors tell us how bad we are. And then there's the cross crits where we're going to have like German classes coming in to look at our work and we're looking at their work and we're all having a constructive
bringing it together
dialogue, about what's going on in
awesome.
the art world.
That sounds good. That would be interesting to see.
It will be very interesting.
You're going to shoot up Germany.
I'm going to try. There are different laws about street photography in Europe, so I should probably brush up on that to make sure I don't end up in the slammer for photographing somebody I shouldn't. But
Yeah, German prison does not sound good, does it?
No, it doesn't.
It does not. Thanks for coming over.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. This is Andrew Paul Cronin, and you've been listening to the Q&A with A.P.C. To hear archived episodes, go to soundcloud.com/QAAPC or subscribe to the show on iTunes. For exclusive content, including upcoming shows, behind-the-scenes pictures, and more, follow the show on Instagram at instagram.com/QAAPC.